think everybody's here. Commissioner Strand apparently is ill today, so he won't be able to make it. Michelle Turnberg comes in today. She's going to learn a little bit about this, and the rest of us are all here. So I think, Joe, we'll let you take it away. And we got a lot of firefighters here today, so thanks for showing up. Glad to see you here.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it very much to talk about this very important topic. As we had mentioned earlier in our budget process, this is perhaps one of the most important topics for our 2025 budget process. And so after today, after the presentation today, what we'll be requesting from the City Commission is some direction on pay philosophy and on some goals and objectives for the budget team as we put together the 2025 budget in its preliminary status. The other thing that we're going to do today is make sure that we leave lots of time to answer questions. You'll have about 20 to 25 slides here today, kind of a high-level overview of compensation and some recommendations from our compensation consultant. And Jill will introduce that team. They've also joined us virtually. So last comment I would make is just that, as with everything for the 2025 budget, we're trying to start earlier this year than last year. It's just great to have our finance staff all in place. As this year we have our team all assembled. And so we are just here to support the commission throughout the summer months as we get this work underway, and I look forward to getting this moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Jill, and she'll introduce the folks that are virtually here today.
All right, thank you. Mayor and Commissioners, we appreciate your time again today to talk about compensation. As Michael had said, this is a very important topic for the city, so we appreciate your time. We want to review some of the information that was presented previously, and then really at the end of the presentation or during, we're hoping to have a good discussion and to receive direction from you as the commission on our comp philosophy and potentially next steps here with implementing a new plan. We do have Christy Reitz and Pat Wamser from MRA are with us today. So together we can try to answer any questions that you have. As we discussed in previous meetings, we had engaged MRA back in 2020. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and so we really re-engaged them again in early 23 to work on this project. We recognized at the start of the 24 budget process it was not going to be the right timing to implement a new pay plan, but we're really hoping that with your guidance that we can potentially implement a new pay plan, new salary structure in 25. So first we want to talk again about why we would like to implement a new pay plan, and there really are three key reasons. Market competitiveness being one of them, employee retention and satisfaction with our current employees with their pay, and then employee recruiting. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these topics and providing some information. So first, our regional market surveys, as well as the Employment Cost Index, or ECI, and the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, really have shown us when we look over the last 6 years that how we move our structure with just COLAs has not quite been keeping up with that, both the ECI and with CPI. Over the last 6 years, the overall increases received by about 70% of our City of Fargo workforce has included an average COLA of 2.5%, and then step increases that average about 2.65. Again, that's only 70% of our workforce, because the other 30% has reached the max of their pay range. And so that 30% of the workforce only receives about a 2.5% COLA on average over these last 6 years. And during that time too, I just want to point out, as we talk about 30%, that is looking at our entire workforce. But when we just isolate one of the largest portions of the workforce, our public safety workforce, about 29% of them are also at max now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So during this time, there were years where the employment cost index really was as high as 4.8%, both governmental and private ECI. And then the consumer price index, as you can see, went as high as 7.99% at the highest point. So again, we feel that our salary structure has been lagging a little bit when you look at all of these indicators, and then our regional market surveys have really supported that as well, the need for an update to our overall salary structure. So the second main factor we want to talk about is also employee retention. Like other organizations across the country, we have experienced an increase in turnover beginning in 2020 and 21, and really into 22 as well. And you can see back in 2017, we were just over a 4% turnover rate. In 23 now, we have declined a little bit from where we were in 22. The good news is we are well below that national average. And so both our statistics and the national average really include all types of reasons that people leave employment. So it is not just the voluntary resignations, but we've included retirements and any involuntary separations as well. Again, fortunately well below that national average, but still something that we definitely need to work on. It's important to note too that not all resignations are due to pay. You know, there are relocations, people take time to care for sick family members, so there's a multitude of reasons that people leave. We do, in exit interviews and exit questionnaires, we do ask how they feel about pay and benefits. Generally, those are actually pretty high on the 1 to 10 scale, but occasionally people who are exiting do give pay as the reason that they are leaving. All right, and then finally, employee recruitment. This too is a key factor in why we want to implement a new plan. So you can see, again, like most organizations, we've experienced a significant decline in the number of applicants, starting really in that pre-2020 even time period. And when we post a position, we probably see somewhere in that 50 to 75% of applications that we would have once received for a single position. We're starting to see that bounce back to the kind of the pre-pandemic norms, but that is a challenge based on labor market that's just happening all across the country. And then just a reminder too that in 25 we will lose the NDPERS defined benefit plan, which we view as an important recruiting and retention tool in the past. So that's another factor in the recommendation to move to a new plan. Any questions on any of that information before we move forward?
Jill, if I could ask a question. And
Sure.
Let me just clarify my role here today. Welcome, Michelle. I will just be asking questions just to inform the decision-making process. I won't state any opinions. Could you just explain how you are calculating the turnover rate? Because that can be calculated in a few different ways.
Yes.
Can you just explain that?
Yeah. So what we do, we use a method that SHRM, the Society for HR Management, has a template for. So each quarter, we look at the number of people who have left employment and the number of employees working at that time, and then are able to get to what the turnover rate is within that month. And then we're calculating that on a quarterly basis and then ultimately on an annual basis. It's a very manual process right now with our current system, so we're looking forward to the new system and that being much less manual than what it is. Some calculations will isolate, for example, voluntary resignations. Because it is such a manual process for us, we have been just tracking for all reasons.
So you're calculating it on the number of bodies, not FTEs?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so next, we want to touch on what the impact will be of the proposed salary structure. This is just a snapshot of the new structure. In front of you, you have the full options A and B structures. But just to show a snapshot, option A really sets that anchor at step 9. And that in option A, step 9 represents 2.5% below the 75th percentile of the market as of January 1st, 24. So our consultants took market data and updated or aged it to the start of 24 and found what the 75th percentile is. So 2.5% below that rate, again, serves as the anchor in option A. So option A is the slightly lower option of the two. Option B, the anchor is set right at that 75th percentile of market. And again, just want to reiterate that's as of January of 24. Both of the options increase the entire structure and provide more room for salary growth. And we'd already talked about that 30% of our workforce is already at max. So this new salary structure, really either option, provides additional room for growth for those that are at max. It also elevates the pay for those in steps 1 through 10 as well. So just looking again at the impact, our range spread in our current plan is 30% from mid to max. The proposed would be 48%, and that would take us from 11 steps now to 17 steps in the new plan. Our public safety, you might recall from our previous discussion as well, that in 2018 to 2019, we did a survey for public safety and determined at that time that our range spreads with that group were already too narrow and had increased the range spreads to approximately 48%. And at that time, the number of steps and how they move through the steps was changed as well. And we'll touch on that in more detail in just a few minutes. But most of the public safety steps or grades have 9 to 10 steps, and the new structure would increase that to 11 steps.
Joe, some of the counties in the area actually went backward in steps. They have less steps than more steps. Is the idea to spread out the overall steps over time for longevity, or what is the philosophy of why you would add more steps?
Yeah, so if we were to increase our range spreads to the 48% and kept our 11 steps, that would really significantly increase those pay increases that occur as step increases. And so the cost of implementing the plan then would be that much more significant. There are so many options when we're looking at a new plan as to what we could do. But in working with the consultants and placing market where we did, we landed on that 17 steps. But you could truly, sky's the limit on options. And so if there's a concern that that's too many steps and that the 2.5% increase isn't adequate between those steps, we certainly could look at other options as well. Okay, so We have three examples. We have an equipment operator, we have firefighter and fire driver, and police officer examples. Are, again, just a couple of things on the screen in front of you. Step 9, you can see, is in red. Just again, a reminder, that's the anchor for this structure. As you look at each step, you can see that the rates of pay are higher than our current steps. That first line represents current in 24, and then you see option A and option B. And then the steps that are outlined in green show the additional steps that an equipment operator would be able to achieve in the new pay plan, where currently they would be maxed out at the 72,946 at step 11. And again, I'm just going to repeat as a reminder, so 30% of our workforce is at that max. So you can see this would have a substantial increase with the retention of the workforce that's, 10 years in, or in some cases less than 10 years, who have already reached that maximum. There are spreadsheets in front of you that we want to take just a minute to walk through. They're the legal size spreadsheets, and Beth is going to walk through examples with you.
So Jill, can I just ask one question before we go to that? To me,
Yes.
the thing that's alarming is that bottom low to the right on that last line, where you start looking at the increases, where you see 10.5%, 14.8, and almost 17% increase. To me, that's the thing that, I think a lot of us support having more steps, but then when you start looking for, that would have a huge impact, especially if you talk about police or fire, where there's a large number of people. That's a concern for me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, and I might have our consultants weigh in on this as well, but just again to point out, when they took the market data and updated it to present, the 75th percentile, so when they laid out all of those rates, they placed equivalent to that step 9. And so what's happening currently with it, for example, an equipment operator, which has been a really hard to recruit, hard to retain position, once people are at their 10 years, presuming they started at step 1, they are stagnant unless they have a COLA. Otherwise, their pay remains the same. And so the goal here was to be more market competitive with those experienced employees. And so again, the number of steps and the widened range supports that approach to help with retention. And Pat or Christy, if there's something that you would like to add to that.
Yeah, I will. This is Pat Monzer. When we did the study that resulted in these recommendations, there were 3 things we knew. One was that your entry level pay, your step 1, step 2, step 3, was not overly competitive in the market. You were having difficulty in some cases hiring someone at step 1, even if they had relatively little experience in the work. We also, when we looked at your current pay, so that first line, against the external market, we found that the 50th percentile of the market was sitting on step 5, and the 75th percentile of the market was sitting on step 9. And we look at, when you had 11 steps, we would be looking for the market to be sitting probably close to the top of your structure, maybe a little below. And since you were already paying at the 75th percentile of the market at the upper part of your structure, we landed on step 9 as what I'll call a market reference point. It just means that when we go back to the market in the future, we want to update your structure. We want to have a place where we linked the market to your structure. The other thing we found in our database as we were comparing your salaries is that the average range spread for the survey population was 44 to 45%. You were at 30. So the way we came up with this particular solution was trying to balance. We don't want to make as Jill said, we don't want to make the step increases themselves too large, because as you go on administering your pay plan, it calls for anyone who's in progression, who isn't at the top of the range, to get a step each year. The other piece of your pay increase is your cost of living, which is where you take the whole schedule up. And of course, people go with it. And so we looked for something that would not, that would balance what you should put into a step increase with what you should put into the cost of living.
I think the difficulty we have is our present step plan is 2.5%, and your A and B are differences, so I'm assuming that's an additional to the 2.5%. To Commissioner Pipcorn's question, when you're on some steps at 14%, that's an additional 2.5 to that. So you're almost at 17% for one step. Am I correct on that? Our present system is 2.5 for every step. Is that correct?
Right. That's what we're proposing. I don't know if your present system was 2.5 for every step. It wasn't uniform. So this structure represents 2.5% for every step, 1 to 2, 10 to 11, 16 to 17, all 2.5%.
But we have never
right.
seen, I don't think Dave and I have ever seen 10%, 12%, 14%. That does not seem to match what we've seen in the past. Can you explain that, please?
The reason those are so high is because that's comparing the current to the proposed at those steps, and the current is flat. Okay. So it's always going to grow. So it's not saying between those steps, it's saying current to either
So it's more because it's flat, it's
Yes,
over
that's why
that
it's
than
growing.
it has before. So into it, the reason it's that way is 10, almost 11 to 12 is almost again 2.5, basically what
Yes.
we're saying.
Yes, and if you look at 5.99 to 8.25, that's about 2.5%. So it's
Thank you, Susan. That explains.
Jill, can I just add one more thing real quick? So this happened because of snow removal. I mean, it was difficult to hire people for Ben Dow to move snow. And so I think the commission, we were very much in favor of, we had interim pay raises because we knew that challenge. So I think we're supportive of that, but it's just that's the part that concerns us, especially that you're going to start talking about a lot of money that will affect the budget. I guess that's my main concern. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yes, yep. And as Susan explained, right now, our current structure is a set amount from one step to the next. And of course, you can calculate a percentage, but it's not a consistent percentage. So like for example, in grade, we'll just say grade 12. I'm not going to get the amount exactly right, but it might be a $1.20 increase from step 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, all the way through. And so as Pat explained, this levels it off so that there is that opportunity for continued 2.5% increases between each step. So those percentages don't represent the percent increase that a person would get in one step. It's just the difference between current and those new structures. So they would continue to get 2.5s during a period where you see the grade step 12 through 17, once that equipment operator gets there, they're just there unless we have a COLA adjustment. But I do understand, yes, to achieve our goals both on recruiting and retention, these plans they come with a significant cost.
Can you tell me, so it looks to me like those percentage differences, it's a heavier emphasis on the low end and then a real large emphasis on the high end. And the middle is kind of close to stagnant. So can you give us a sense of the percentage of employees that are in that middle segment? They'll see the lower end come up closer and the higher end go further away. Can you give us a sense of how many are in that segment?
I could give you a best estimate. Pat, is that a number that you have in your analysis?
I don't have it summarized.
Okay.
Let me just see if I can tell here.
So we know that 30% are at step 11. And so this would benefit that 30%. I don't know how that breaks down. What I can tell you is even for hiring now, we are more frequently than we ever have having to hire at a higher step than step 1 as well. So just anecdotally, I would guess that we've got a pretty large portion in that mid range, that 3 to 10. But we could look at that number and get back to you and send that out.
Yeah, I apologize. When I'm talking middle, I'm looking at the entire range that you're proposing. So currently, that step 9 is close to the top instead of being in the middle, I guess.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so what we'd like to do now, again, the spreadsheets that you have in front of you, that legal size, it shows what's on the screen, but also just provides some additional examples. And Beth has done some calculations to show if we were to move forward with option B, for example, what does that mean for an equipment operator and their actual rate of pay? What would happen for them? So Beth?
Okay, so in the bottom box of the first page, you'll see our example fill equipment operator. And on the left side, he is showing in step 3 of our current pay plan. So you can see right now, Phil's rate of pay is $59,509. And if we were to implement Plan B of the proposed plan and move to that plan on December 23rd of 2024, he would move into step 3 of that new plan, moving his rate of pay to $62,133, or giving him an increase of $2,624 or 4.22%. And then on March 1st of 2025, Phil has his anniversary, and so he would receive a step increase at that time, moving him to step 4 on the new plan, giving him another increase to $63,686 and an additional $1,553 or 2.5%. And then on the right side of your example, you'll see Phil as if he were at step 11 of our current plan. His pay rate is $72,946, and then would move on to option B at step 11 on December 23rd of 2024, moving his pay rate to $75,703, and giving him an increase of $2,757 or 3.64%. And then on his anniversary date of March 1st, he would move to step 12 of the new plan, making $77,596 and giving him an additional $1,893 or 2.5%. And remaining on our current pay plan would mean that Phil did not get an increase in 2025 without an approval of a COLA.
Next, we want to look at an example of a firefighter or firefighter driver. Again, just a little bit of history on this position. So we conducted our public safety study that we did internally back in 2018 to 2019 timeframe. And so at that time, because we recognized that we were already lower in terms of our range spread. They too were at 30% at the time, like the rest of the city. We implemented the new plan for public safety positions at 48% spread. We also found that the market data showed that we needed to accelerate their growth through the plan. So where an equipment operator during that time may have gotten about a 2.5% increase, our firefighters during that time were more at like a 5 or 6% increase between some of those accelerated steps. So just wanted to point that out, that really we are trying to accomplish in part for the rest of our employees what we accomplished with expanding those range spreads for public safety back in 2019 to 2020. Our intent was to do that right in 2020, and you all know the rest of that story. So we're hoping now we can catch up the rest of our pay structure as well. So Beth will provide an example here too with the firefighter and driver.
Joe firefighter on the left side would progress onto the new plan, and then through that plan very similarly to how Phil equipment operator did. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him, but then on the right side, Joe becomes a fire driver and is now at step 10 of our current plan. His pay rate is $84,827. And on December 23rd, 2024, he would move into step 10 of our new plan, moving him to $89,987, giving him a $5,160 increase or 5.73%. And then on Joe's anniversary date of March 1st, 2025, he would move to step 11 of the new plan, putting him at a rate of $92,237, an additional $2,250 or 2.5%.
Beth, is there a reason you didn't do step 12 through 17?
The firefighters, because of the compressed pay plan, will max at step 11 on the new plan.
So
currently
they would
max
stay
at
this
10.
way but advance faster? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
So the younger guys will have a salary increase quicker, but then they'll hit a step, finally a plateau at 11, and then that's a COLA only after that.
Exactly. And then on the last page, we have the same scenario for a police officer. And again, Bob police officer on the left side would move on to and through the plan just like Joe and Phil would have. So again, I'm going to focus on the right-hand side where Bob is maxed out on our current plan at step 9.
Advance the slides, please.
Yep. Sorry, that's me.
On cops.
And so Bob's current rate is $89,710. On December 23rd of 24, he would move on to step 9 of the new plan, making $94,816 and giving him a $5,106 increase or 5.39%. And then on Bob's anniversary date of March 1st, 2025, he would move to step 10 of the new plan, putting him at a rate of $97,186, giving him an additional $2,370 or 2.5%.
Okay, our next slide really just touches on those implementation options that Beth just described through both of those examples. So I won't spend a lot of time here unless there are any questions. All right, we wanted to provide you with a snapshot of the overall cost. So thank you to Jordan and Finance for looking at the numbers and calculating kind of what we view as actual potential costs of implementation. So that top section includes all employees. The middle section is the general fund total, so isolating that, and that represents, I believe, about 80% of total costs, the general fund. So Starting on the left, both options A and B show the cost to convert to the new pay table. And the next column, steps in 2025, show that added cost of implementing the new structure and moving, using those new 2.5% step increases. Taxes and pension, of course, are affected by those rate increases, so she's factored that in and shows a grand total, both the total of all at the top and then just the general fund total in the middle. And we know that even if we don't implement the pay plan, we wanted to be able to show what the cost would be of the 2025 steps on our current structure. And so we've really treated those as kind of an offset because those steps would be occurring regardless. So when you factor those in, the incremental increase then is that far right-hand column. Again, general fund reflected in the middle. And then under the new plan, the COLA estimate, if we were to do a 1% COLA, in addition to the new pay plan, because remember the market data that was used for comparison was updated to January of 24. So cities and counties and even private sector around us will likely be doing updates to their salary structures. So if a 1% COLA was implemented on option B, that shows a grand total of 1.031. Again, on our current structure, that 1% COLA costs about $879,000 plus. So the budget team has spent a lot of time discussing these options and variations. Based on what we've presented today, the budget team's recommendation would be option B, that we would implement effective December 23rd, or the start of pay period 1 of 2025. That allows us to catch up to market in 2024. We would also recommend that a COLA is considered, and in order to keep us in line with market, again with that December of 24 date. And so this is where we're looking for guidance from you all in the commission. So when we started this discussion, we talked about the goal of having an overall compensation philosophy. And typically that's one of three things. You can lag market, you can match market or be market competitive, or you can lead market. And what we are proposing really gets us in that market competitive area. And that's the end of the information that we have for you. So we're happy to answer any questions and are hoping for an opportunity to discuss next steps.
Thank you for sharing this information. You know, good decisions start with good data, and I just want to share that we're seeing this information today, for some of it for the first time. I have also met with all of my directors of my portfolio assigned departments and have asked for their input. I have sent 19 questions, which you graciously answered last week in an extensive meeting and discussion. I'm still digesting that information. A couple of questions right now, and I'm sure I'll have more. The first is, as part of that discussion last week, you shared that the market comparative data was stopped at 2022 and a 6.4% inflationary adjustment was made for that as the starting data overall. In the discussion that we had at the last informational meeting, you shared that Fargo was the largest municipality of the data that was considered. I would like to ask what role the consultants, and the reason being that it depended on the surveys that were returned and the information you received. Can you share what the role of the consultant was in making sure we got market data that was comparative, please?
Yes, and just to clarify, Fargo was not the largest, but one of the larger employers. I think that was, Pat had indicated that from MRA during the last presentation. And so with any survey, we typically send them out to like, it's over 30 cities that we invite to participate. And you typically have a sampling of larger population, larger number of employees, and a sampling of smaller population, smaller number of employees. And so we've achieved that of those that we invite, but it always depends on who chooses to respond to the survey. And then in some cases, respondents will provide data on a particular position, but choose not to, maybe on another grouping of positions. But I think Pat's comment was that we were one of the larger cities of those who responded to that survey. And so they have access to data, and I'll ask her to just clarify where they pull that data from too. But that's a common practice in the world of comp, that when you have data that's, was collected a year or two ago, that you essentially age it or update it based on whatever factors you're looking at within that market area. And so Pat and her colleague had determined that 6.4% was the appropriate amount to age that data that was collected in early 22. And Pat, I would invite you to make some, to respond to that too.
I will tell you that aging data up to maybe 2 years from when it was current is about as far as I think a good compensation consultant would want to go. I think the data was aged about 21 months. The 6.4% was not, I want to just say it wasn't inflation, because I would think of that as cost of living, but it was the cost of labor changes. So what we did is looking at the change in pay practices from the time the data was effective in 2022 to January 1 of 2024, that pay had increased about 6.4%. And where that comes from is there are several sources of data that look at how much pay has gone up from one year to the next, or how much people are saying they will move their pay plans. So the 6.4 would be, let's say, maybe 3.1% from 2022 to 2023, and then another percent of a little higher than that for the next 12 months. And that's what got us to the 6.4.
Okay, the second question. And I appreciate your patience with me to understand this information for, again, a good decision. Here's where I'm struggling. We're presented here with two options, A and B. I know you've been working on this for a long time, really, behind the scenes, but we're seeing, again, these options for the first time with, at least in the first meeting, I thought very little context. Although I've gotten a number of answers and I'm still waiting on additional information, which I greatly appreciate. But it seems to me that the compensation philosophy should have been the first thing that we finalized, and then apply what are the recommendations and why. And so I guess for me, I would like to see a next step of asking the FAR committee to put together their recommendations to the full commission for a compensation philosophy that then aligns with these recommendations, really looking at the data. I know we're on a time crunch here, and I would hope that the FAR committee would get input from the cabinet members of each department who have very strong feelings about this as well. They're on the front lines every day with the challenges of both recruitment and retention. And to me, that seems like a missing step here before we come into a recommendation for either option A or option B, or for us to determine, without any context, what kind of a compensation philosophy should drive this decision. So that would be my request, is that we include the FAR committee and cabinet members, whether they provide input to the FAR committee to bring back recommendations. That's very thoughtful. I know that time is, of the essence here, but that would be very helpful from my perspective.
Commissioner, could you just clarify to what additional context you're looking for that would be helpful?
The compensation philosophy recommendations that should then inform what are the recommendations for these changes. And to me, we put the horse before the cart here, or the cart before the horse, I'm sorry. Cart before the horse. Without that compensation philosophy completely understood, I think that was missing.
Could I comment on this? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Pat. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say you're absolutely right that it feels like it is kind of the cart before the horse this time. When we work with an organization to develop a salary structure or to update a structure, sometimes we do meet with leadership up front and say, let's get your ideas on your compensation philosophy. And there's a lot of parts of it. Some of it has to do with defining your market. Where do you want to pay in that market? Things like what's going to be the determinant of pay delivery? Is it going to be performance, time in job, those kinds of things? And I do recommend that those things get nailed down and put on paper. In this particular situation, once we looked at your 2023 structure in relation to the market data, we found, as I said, that generally the market 75th percentile was around your step 9. And so in effect, we've captured your practice and proposed it as a policy that 75th percentile of the market be where you set step 9 in your structure. From there, I think you want to look at, do we agree with that? I think we had to address the range spread. We had to address that you were having trouble hiring at the bottom of the range. But I would just very much say that in this way, we're kind of playing back to you what your current practice is and saying, does this make sense as a philosophy?
Well, and so, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Just want to say one other thing. The market data consisted of the survey that City of Fargo commissioned. MRA conducted it. And I like Jill said, it was about 35 cities. And so the other thing to look at is you're a relatively large participant, large organization in that population. So it doesn't surprise me to see you at the 75th percentile since we define the market as that survey. So just want to note that, because one of the other things in a compensation philosophy is who do we think our market is? Clearly it's other cities and government employers, but it could also be going forward the for-profit sector of the community who does hire some of the kinds of jobs that you employ.
So you're saying we captured current practice, but before this, we really hadn't had a defined compensation philosophy. So the compensation philosophy has evolved over time from, depending on every 2 years who sits on the commission and approves the budget and the respective COLA for that year. Before it was a PEC committee that would look at it, not very transparently, but my hope is that we could get some kind of recommendation from the FAR committee to bring back their recommendations for a compensation philosophy.
I think one of the major questions, Susan and Mike, you have to answer, it's a plan, but can we afford it? So is the revenue there to take part of the general fund, 4.6 million? And even when you say the current steps are 750,000, there's still steps that are going to cost us. I mean, we can say they're not there, but they're really there. So great plan, but if we can't afford it, then it's not going to work. The other thing I noticed, and part of what Commissioner Kolpak's getting at, is that you look at the top ends and you have a higher number that goes up. So you start at 6.4, but some of your high ends are 8.3 and the ones that are exempt. So in a sense, if I say 30% exempt, that's usually my more expensive employees that are termed out, can't go any higher. And I just wanted to know if we can't make the 4.6, do we have options in this plan to modify it so it can work? Because oftentimes they're getting a step, COLA, and another step, the equivalent of 6, 7, 8, 9% in 1 year. And we may be off on the market, but we have to correct it all in 1 year. I'm just curious, I think what we're talking about is if we can't afford it, then we can't even discuss this. If we can't afford it, what options do we have? Less steps? Is it less money? What is it that we would do to do that? I think Dave was asking the question, and I'm glad to get us into market. Can we do it all in 1 year? Do we have the revenue to do that? And it's just like when you go out with your kid to buy a car, he has his eyes on something he's going to do, and I have my eyes on the checkbook and what the budget is. And I think that's kind of what we have to get here is we have all the firemen here, they deserve a raise, they deserve their salaries to go up. We want to be competitive with them, but we also want to be mindful of what we could do with the taxpayers. So just a question of if it can be managed, I'm fine, let's do it today, but I have a curiosity, I think we have some revenue issues.
Well, that's the decision that we make with all budgets. You have to balance your wants and needs with your available resources. So the intent today was to understand what the priorities are so that as we're doing that and as we forward a budget, we know that priority should be this or should it be this. So, our plan is to work as best we can to address these issues within the budget. And then as we bring it forward, we'll have options for you if there's revenue shortfalls or if there are options to cut some additional costs. So those will be your choices, but we're going to try to bring this as full as we can.
And I think the commissioners have always wanted to be market competitive. We don't necessarily want to be out in front of the wave, but we want to be market competitive because we're tired of training people and then having go into the private sector. I mean, how many times we do that? We train excellent people and then they go off somewhere else. We actually want to stay here in Fargo. So that was just the question I wanted to ask. These numbers are hard, and then it's a little bit of when you go to that 17 steps, what the impact that has on us before. Is it 15 steps you do, or is it something different? So just a curiosity question, and Susan, I presume we'll bring back to the commissioners kind of our best solution. Is that basically what you're going to say to me?
That's correct. We'll be working really hard the next 2 or 3 weeks to get.
Okay. Michael, any comment on that?
Well, I was just going to add, Susan captured that comment very well. This is really about trying to let the philosophy guide how we back into other decisions, because this will no doubt result in some other decisions that need to be made in the general fund. New hiring is something we're not talking about within this context, but that is directly related to this topic in that you aren't perhaps having as much revenue availability or flexibility if you're trying to get those revenues over to your existing workforce. So we will want to try be as responsive as we can to the pay philosophy and the desire of the commission to go in that direction. So this is really just an important amount of data that we haven't had before. And I think that, as I said at the outset, we want to put this information in the hands of the commissioners so that you have the best information, the earliest information possible as we start making some of these choices as a budget team so that we can come in with a balanced budget and one that's responsive, but one that takes care of the needs of the workforce, but as well as what we're trying to do for the future as well. Because, Mayor, to your point, you're absolutely correct. Compensation is important, but so too are other priorities of the budget. We're also not talking about health insurance today, but that's a number that we won't know what that health insurance premium will be. We'll have to plan for that, as well as other operating budgets that I will just say we've been quite austere. We have been quite judicious in trying to trim operating budgets over the last several years. That was really incumbent on us, especially in the COVID years, to do that, and we have done that. And so we would like to restore some of those budgets if we can. Again, not the topic for today, but that's why we wanted to have this conversation first about this key cornerstone topic of compensation.
And then when you're talking 6.4, I assume that's without the COLA, so it's actually 7.4, is that correct?
So the 6.4% that Pat used to age the market data is just to get the regional market data to present or to January of '24. So then that's where those comparisons came in, looking at what that 75th percentile looks like. But that in of itself doesn't necessarily equate to what increases would be for individual employees, if I understood your question.
You gave us a score sheet here that has what I got, 6.72. I'm assuming I add a COLA of 1% to that?
Yes, if you're looking at the specific example, that is how someone would progress, but that does not encompass a COLA. That's just looking at
That's
option
all
B.
I need to know. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Michelle, you drinking the water hose now? Any other discussion or comments or questions? I think Susan and Michael have asked for any questions by the commissioners to get any more data, and that would be helpful to us. If there's any department heads or people in the audience that want to give us some questions, that would be helpful for us to find out what your concerns are about what you've seen today. It is a complex salary structure. It always was, always will continue to be, but we're trying to be competitive, so we'll continue to do that. So, Jill, any closing comments?
No, I think we have covered everything. Thank you again for your time today, and thank you to Camilla and Beth and our consultants from MRA and the budget team for all the input as well, and we'll continue to work on answering any questions that you have.
And Mayor, I would just add my thanks and gratitude as well to our budget and finance team, HR team, for all the work that they put into this. This will be an ongoing project for us throughout the summer. We will also make sure to brief Commissioner Strand and get him these slides and the same information. And we'll look forward to additional conversations. If there are points of feedback or questions that commissioners have, we're more than happy to work with you individually as well. Thank you.
And Pat, thank you for joining us today, clarifying some questions we had. Thank you again for the HR team for doing a good job today. Made it simple, made us understandable, and now we get to wrestle the facts down. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.